Hi, Redeemer. Welcome to this week's FAQ. The question for this week is, what does Reformed mean? So you may have heard of Reformed churches or Reformed theology. And I generally would refer to myself as Reformed or to Redeemer as Reformed. But what does that mean? And it can get a little complicated. And let's see if we can sort through it here in a couple minutes. So most of you have heard of the Protestant Reformation, where the Protestant churches broke off from the Catholic Church, and you can hear that word "reformed" in there in Reformation. So some people would call Reformed churches any Protestant church. Not most people. Um, when as time went on, these things started getting more and more defined, and you start to having different break-off groups and denominations. Lutheranism kind of became its own thing. You had this group of people that really identified with Luther, and you had these people that really identified with Calvin's influence, and that tended to become referred to as Reformed, the Reformed churches. And then you get into this whole idea of the confessional churches, the Heidelberg Catechism, the Westminster Catechism. These are the high church Reformed churches, historically, churches that affirm things like covenant theology, infant baptism, a Presbyterian form of government, and doctrines of grace, Calvinism, that kind of thing. Those became known as the Reformed churches. And that has gotten even more complicated as time has gone on because these things split off in different ways. Some Reformed churches that I talk to, people who call themselves Reformed churches, are very liberal in the sense that they've gotten off, maybe even in the inerrancy of Scripture. They certainly are not affirming the sovereignty of God, but they can trace their history and roots to some kind of confessional church. And so they're even part of a Reformed denomination, so they call themselves Reformed. Um, in my circles, Reformed has come to mean kind of Calvinistic, right? So you affirm the doctrines of grace. So you have this idea of what's called Reformed Baptist churches, which is, I would say, we're Reformed Baptist-y. A Baptist church generally does not practice infant baptism, right? We practice believers' baptism. And we don't have a Presbyterian form of government, which means we don't have a kind of a hierarchy in denomination. It's really independent churches. The authority rests at the local church. And so they're Baptistic in that sense, but they adhere to a lot of the doctrines of grace and the classical Reformed teaching on God's sovereignty, Calvinism, and that kind of thing. So for me, Reformed means Calvinistic or Calvinist when it comes to our views on God's sovereignty and our views on how God works in salvation and sanctification. It doesn't mean we affirm everything that Calvin taught or Luther taught. So anyway, these things get convoluted. Are we Reformed? I'm comfortable saying I am. Then again, we don't hear me saying that from the pulpit every week, or it's not blasted on the website. But generally, I'd say Redeemer's a Reformed church. All right, there it is. See you later.